We're thrilled to have you with us. And as always, a big thank you to our partner, PwC, for their support of the CPG Speak series. Once again, information on upcoming sessions can be found online at consumerbrandsassociation.org/CPG Speaks. Today, I'm joined by Bea Perez, Chief Public Affairs, Communications, and Sustainability Officer at the Coca-Cola Company. Coca-Cola is one of the most recognized brands in the world. Behind the brand is a team that works with purpose and sustainability, their local community, and in partnership with others. I'm happy to have Bea with us today to discuss the steps Coca-Cola is taking to be a global leader in ESG, how they approach social issues, and the impact COVID-19 has on the company's communications efforts. As always, we'll speak for about 30 minutes, then we'll get into your questions. If you have questions for Bea, please submit them in the Zoom Q&A function. So let's go ahead and get started. Bea, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeff, for having me. I'm really looking forward to having the conversation with you and to all the questions.
Well, that's great. As best I can tell, looking back at your resume and the bio, you've been with Coca-Cola for one heck of a long time, mostly your entire career. Tell us a little bit about that history and your experiences at Coca-Cola.
Yeah, so over 25 years. So I like to say that I've been alive half as long as I've worked at Coca-Cola. I don't know if I'm getting that math right, but it's close enough. I mean, it's been amazing. Coca-Cola is a brand that I've always loved and appreciated, and who wouldn't want to, as a marketer, work at the #1 marketing brand in the world? And so I feel fortunate because every single day that I get to wake up and do something with Coca-Cola and the brand and the company and the people there, it's extraordinary. And 25 years ago, I had no idea I'd be sitting in the seat I'm in today. What I love is that I work for a company that allowed me to come in the door through brand management. And I got to experience what it was like to sit at that table. But I also had a mentor and someone who came to me and said, if you really want to understand how brands come to life, you have to go into the field organization and see where actually they come to life at the point of purchase and in the communities. And so I shifted into operations, and I spent many years there working with our bottling partners who really do execute the brands at the local level and make that deep, meaningful connection with consumers and with our customers. And those were experiences that, as a young individual in the company, I didn't really understand how important they would be until today and later on in life. At the same time, working around the world, I've gotten to work in different countries and live on different assignments in different countries, from China, Brazil, Mexico. I've worked around over 100 and some odd companies or countries. And for me, seeing the different people and going in to understand different cultures and nuances, I think really helps to build your brain when you're thinking about what do people want from your brands and what value can you create for society. So fast forward to today, and 2011, I was appointed as the company's first Chief Sustainability Officer. So I got to marry my personal passions with my work, which is a dream come true. We continue to embed sustainability into the business, and we're very purpose-driven. What I like to tell people, and we could go on for hours, is the first thing I did is I walked into the archives to understand, well, what has the company done in this space? And actually, I got a little nervous because I said, well, what am I going to be able to do that the company hasn't already done? Because when I walked through the archives, I found in 1934, we were the first public company to ever put a female on its corporate board of directors, Letty Pate Evans. In 1934, I thought, oh, wow, okay, so, we've already been focusing on gender equality since 1934, and that's been really a program that we've continued to accelerate in our business, and you can see it through the numbers of our women in leadership and operational roles. At the same time, as I walked through that journey, I got to learn that we were the first to actually innovate in recycled PET and create recyclable bottles. The list goes on and on. The first to invent a sugar-free soft drink, Tab, that was in 1963, over 50 years ago. Wow. So if you look, and by the way, it was created by female scientists. So the stories are deeply connected. And what I learned is that actually we had done a lot, but a couple things as a marketer struck me. No one really knew. So I did the research to find out, do people know what we stand for? People could generally say, oh, you're a great brand. You're in sports, entertainment, you have a lot of fun. The deep, meaningful connection to community and society, I'm not sure was top of mind for people. So I had a challenge as a marketer and now as the Chief Sustainability Officer. How do you connect the story, as it was just starting to grow in the minds of consumers that they wanted to purchase brands that shared their values? But if they didn't know Coke shared their values, why would they choose us and somebody else? So, I could go on forever, but I will tell you that, 20, 25 plus years later, I wake up every single day. The challenges are still there, but I love working with the people, the brands, and I love to take on the challenges and see how we can continue to add value. Because as you know, it's easy to take something that's broken. It's much, much harder to take something that people perceive as good and high quality and add value to it and really bring people along that journey. So for me, I'm excited to still be here. It feels like yesterday. I don't feel like it's been over 25 years. My age tells me it's been over 25 years, but I feel fortunate to have been on this journey.
Well, your passion certainly comes through loud and clear, which is great. In terms of the history lesson, let me ask you, back in the 80s, Coca-Cola had a fashion line. In fact, I was wearing Coca-Cola rugby shirts to school. I mean, do
Yes.
you go back that far? Do you remember that whole period? Are we going to see the fashion line come back?
So it's interesting. I happen to have the licensing division within my remit. So I can tell you that fashion is really a fascinating thing, and it's what a great expression and how people love your brand if they're willing to wear it. And so that was back, Tommy Hilfiger was a phenomenal partner of ours, and that was the first original sort of Coca-Cola polos. We've done Coca-Cola pants. Just in the last year, we've also launched brands, Coke collaboration brands. My son always tells me, Mom, it's not collab, it's collab. I don't even know the difference because I'm not as hip and young, but the teams who run the business are, and they knew to partner with a brand named Kith. And so we launched these different amazing oversized sweatshirt programs with Kith. And I looked at them and I said, these are great, but I would wear them like before I go to bed. And my son was like, no, Mom, we wear them year round. And these are really cool. And by the way, the research told us that too. So when the teams presented, I thought, this is really interesting. Well, within the first 10 minutes of going for sale online, they sold out. And, we're now on our third or fourth program with them. We've continued to expand different relationships, working with Diesel on recycled jeans. So meaning, take the PET, the plastic bottles, recycle them, turn them into a material, and you can create new things, wearables. And so how do you bridge sustainability with this notion of fashion and licensing and responsible fashion? So also bringing the work together has been really a lot of fun. But thank you for wearing the brand, because for me, that's the biggest sign of a compliment in terms of when people say, I'm proud enough and I love your brand enough to wear it.
A walking billboard.
Yes.
Let's switch over to the ESG conversation. Obviously, a big area of focus for you. All the talk right now within companies is that ESG is more important. You have investors talking about ESG being more important. Larry Fink and BlackRock and what they're encouraging companies to do. Is it all talk or has something changed?
A lot has changed. And I can tell you, since I can speak from 2011 to today, in 2011, the company would put me in front of investors to talk about sustainability. And I was really thankful that the company believed at it and really embedded it into the business. But it was interesting. I would not get the questions. So I'd sit in the room. A lot of us would stare at each other. All they wanted to know was revenue, profit, which new brands were you launching? Sustainability, they felt because they were invited for those questions, they would have to ask them. That was 2011, 2012. Today, and by the way, we didn't give up. I put a secret mission in my mind that said, I'm going to really continue to push the consumer data that we're seeing, because we were seeing it in the consumer interest. So we knew the investors would care ultimately because they care about consumers and growth. So I thought, maybe we've been talking about it the wrong ways, because a lot of times in the sustainability industry overall, this goes beyond Coke, we talk a lot about risk mitigation. What are the risks to the business in terms of natural resources? So, water's a risk. It's the number one most precious ingredient in a drink, but also to community. You can't have a community thriving without water. So people can understand it. But it's harder to say, well, actually, if you have 100% recycled bottles, or if you reinvent the bottle and design out waste and design in sustainable materials in a new way of thinking, you'll be rewarded with growth. So as consumers started to catch up, we changed how we talked about it to the industry as well as to investors. And we started to tell not just a risk mitigation story, but the growth story. At the same time, we work to get very clear with our accounting firm partner. What are the common definitions? How can we measure and track this? How can we report it out like we do our annual business review? today, a couple years, we have 2 or 3 years already of launching our annual business and sustainability report at the same time. It's one report. And so consumers, investors, stakeholders can see how sustainability drives growth. And then what's really interesting is about 3 years ago was when our investor relations team called me and they said, the investors are now calling us. They want to talk to you and to the teams around the work you're doing. And I think that they too were seeing the consumer data. And I think the pandemic right now has shown that it's even more critically important, because when we look at data that's come from different surveys, Accenture had a survey that said 63% of consumers want to purchase brands that share their values. We also see a lot of data in terms of pricing models and what consumers say there. The investors were looking at that data. We've been looking at that data for quite a long time too, but now through the pandemic, you're actually seeing the realization of the data. The actions are matching the words, and consumers are starting to opt out of things that they don't feel are necessary in their lives, and also that they don't feel create value or not doing the right things. And so we've been very fortunate that while, I'll admit some of our business has suffered because people aren't going out. So they're not going to restaurants. The lockdowns had an impact. We also see this resurgence of people who really want to support our brands and who are choosing us because they're citing that they feel we've been responsible during the pandemic, as well as when the social justice issues really came to light over the last couple of months. We took a position, and actually the Consumer Brands Association with us as an advocacy group, you all worked with us and partnered with us, and we partnered with you and others in terms of how do you push policies around equality and help to defeat the Georgia, or really get in place the Georgia hate crimes bill that didn't exist. There were 4 states without it. Georgia now has just passed that into legislation. You all were very much a part of helping us advocate for that as well. And consumers reward it. So that's what's changed, is that consumers are now using their voice and speaking up and demanding it from brands. Investors are paying close attention to the growth opportunity. And now that those have come together, I really do believe that this is going to change how brands are created and how they market and how consumers make their purchase decisions. At the same time, we also know that compensation is really important too. Employees come to work for employers who are serious about it. You're serious when you pay people to do the work that is required, but you also have rewards and consequences, right? And so for us, we embedded it into short-term compensation. So people get rewarded for the work that they do in the space and understand it's core to the business and part of our purpose of refreshing the world and making a difference, because that's what we stand for. And then at the same time, we're starting to have the discussions with our board of directors who pay attention to this, because we have a board subcommittee around how do we also embed this into long-term compensation. So those are the things that are different. And I can tell you 10 years ago, we were not having these conversations, nor were we driving these actions.
So if you were talking to one of your peers at another company who perhaps was struggling to break through in terms of making ESG a focus, not having ESG seen solely as a cost center, helping leadership see that there are metrics that you can put against this that drive the customer relationship, that increase profitability, what would you encourage those people to do who perhaps aren't in as progressive of a location as you find yourself?
I would say rely on the data. So I think you have to have the holistic story. So of course, many of those people will start with the risk mitigation, because if you don't have ingredients for your brands, then you don't have a product. That's one side of it. I would really encourage them to dial in to the growth discussion around how are consumers going to make choices around your products or services, and use that to drive the consideration across the business units or whatever operating units you have in your type of business. And make sure that this is on the radar of your senior executives. I believe it is today for any publicly traded company, because of BlackRock, of Vanguard, of all those organizations, the World Economic Forum, because the frameworks are coming, the expectation is there. You have something called the SASB, the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board. So most people know FASB. It's not the same. It's a different organization. This is sustainability. And so all of those frameworks are being required now by investors. So lean into that and go to your executives, go to your head of investor relations and say, if you're not hearing about this, or if you're getting questions and you're not sure how to answer it, let us help you. Let us build that story for you around the growth agenda. And that's the advice I would give them, because what I found is that once we unlocked the growth equation, that for us seemed to unlock sort of the pervasive activation across the business. We had a lot of employees who were doing things and who really cared about it. This also gave them a way in and a voice to express how they could contribute to the overarching goals.
I'm going to ask you to come at this next question from two different angles. When you look at COVID and ESG, where has it slowed some of your efforts, if you're being completely honest, right? Because it certainly has changed some dependency in the public on plastic and some other things. Where has it slowed, perhaps temporarily, some of your efforts? Where has it propelled some of your efforts?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, we launched something called World Without Waste, and the goal there was 100% collection of our packaging. And so, as you know, with lockdowns, the collectors were not collecting. And plastic pollution is a real issue that needs to be solved in this world. We know it can't be solved alone. So we also knew that this wasn't just our problem that needed to be solved, especially when a lockdown occurs and people can't get out to collect the material. So what's going to happen? And you don't want to slow down your goals or miss them because of that. So we did a couple things. We said, well, we know this is a real barrier. We can't ask people to go out when they're being asked by governments to be in a lockdown. We would never do that as a brand or as a company. You would lose trust and confidence, and that's not the right thing to do. So we said, well, what else can we do during this time to design in more sustainable solutions and to invest to accelerate innovation? So we have to really think through sort of, if you think about eliminating plastic pollution, collection won't be enough. You have to bring it back and create the circular economy and do bottle to bottle to, t-shirts, whatever the case may be. But also you have to think of new solutions. So we accelerated the innovation. So we did a lot of financial investment, and we invested in things like expanding touchless solutions for beverages. So today consumers want to bring their container. So I have my Coca-Cola returnable. Here I can take my own device, go to the touchless machine, download the drink on my phone that I want. It's our freestyle machine. You might find it in a lot of restaurants. There's 10,000 of the touchless units. You put your container down and it fills it up. You don't have to touch the machine. If the restaurant is open or you're picking up your food to go because of the lockdown, you don't have to interact with it, which solves for a couple issues. People don't want to touch things right now because of the pandemic, because we know that there's some risk in touching things that other people have touched. They also want to minimize their waste, and so you don't have another plastic bottle. You have your own device that you can use again and again. So we invested in driving the scale around those. At the same time, we invested in, for example, there's an initiative called Circulate Capital. It's an investment fund with other partners, including our competition. And so within that investment fund, over this pandemic, we're able to invest in a company in India, for example, that is finding new solutions to break down the PET that's collected in order to be able to reuse it again and again. And so that innovation needed funding. Now was the time to do it while collection wasn't happening, because you could do more experiments, but you needed the investment. Or in Indonesia, in a women-owned business that was doing similar things in terms of innovating in these technologies. So we found ways to do financial investments to be able to keep the work moving, look at new material solutions, look at new equipment solutions, start to think about what is the bottle of the future or the beverage container of the future. I won't even call it a bottle, because who knows what it's going to be, but really start to focus in that space, as well as continue to further the partnerships. So we know we can't do this alone. It requires government, civil society to partner as well, business to business. And so really keeping those conversations moving and actioning goals and commitments together, as well as at the same time, where some countries have opened up, we knew that the collectors needed, because there's a lot of informal collection systems, they needed to have investments as well. So we did community donations to be able to make sure that those collection organizations who that was their livelihood had the money to be able to continue to do the work if they had the stop and start of the lockdowns. And so we also did that at the same time to keep those relationships so people had jobs to return to. And so it's multiple aspects of it, but on one hand, the challenge is the lockdowns and the work slows on one aspect. On the other hand, finding those innovative solutions to keep work going, so by the time we get out of all of this or the lockdowns end, you haven't lost time to accelerate the path forward.
And you make a great point about the collection, and it speaks to the broader system, right? If we're going to solve a lot of these packaging issues, we have to establish that there's shared responsibility. There's responsibility certainly within the consumer packaged goods industry, but there's responsibility also within the waste industry. There's responsibility also within the resin makers, the chemical companies, right? We all need to be at the table as part of the solution. Our industry is certainly there today, and we're doing everything we can to bring others to the table. I think that may well be a lasting change that comes from COVID, this understanding that that there is a degree of shared responsibility. We know that as we look back on COVID, right, the office place will never be the same.
Yes.
Business travel will probably be permanently affected in one way or another. Is there something when we look back 10 years from now, you're going to say that change began with COVID? You mentioned kind of the touchless drinking fountain of sorts, but is there anything else that comes to mind where you think we're going to look back and say that was COVID inspired?
Yeah, I think, understanding and respect for others is going to be deeply ingrained in this next generation. I think we're going to see a lot of resiliency. But let me talk about culture for a minute. I mean, right now we're seeing your work is your home. I'm actually, I will tell people exactly where I am and you'll laugh. Most people think I'm sitting in an office in my home. I'm sitting in my bedroom because my husband works at the CDC and he's working in our other office downstairs. And so when I'm doing my work, because he's working from home and I have a son who's doing university from home, and I have a daughter, said, well, okay, I'll displace myself because I actually used to travel all the time. I was the one who was never home. I've now intruded on their lives. And so instead of displacing them, I'm here. And so now everyone sees this, but sometimes I turn my camera on. I'm like, there's my bed right there. My husband and I sleep right there. And people get a good laugh because sometimes people, think that everything's perfect because you see a nice bookshelf. It looks very organized. I have my Coke bottle. Your hair looks good, right? You look great over there, Jeff. And they don't know the chaos happening behind the scenes. And so I have some employees who are managing 3 kids under the age of 10, having to homeschool their children because schools are closed. Maybe they're single. Maybe they have a partner. Maybe they don't. Pets where they've got their animals they have to go and walk, or they're taking care of aging relatives. We don't know people's circumstances. And when you go to an office, you don't always see that. When you look through the window of the soul to someone's home through this video, you get a little bit more of a flavor for it. And I have found that the understanding and the compassion that people now show and really try to learn from and learn about different cultures and that respect for humanity itself, I think that was something that was growing, but is now really going to accelerate in terms of how people make decisions, get to resolution on conflicts, debate each other. I think the understanding and that compassion is there. I'd also say we have a generation who's going to have to be more resilient, and I believe they will. Some, kids were graduating high school or graduating college. Maybe they don't have jobs now. Maybe they're doing school from home. Maybe they're seeing their parents now for the first time working at home on their monitors, where before work was something their parents left and came back. Or maybe, there's 10 people in a 2-bedroom apartment working together. You'll see that these generations will be resilient because everyone's having to work through those problems. And it's not easy. We know the pressures have become greater, the stress, the anxiety, that's definitely there. But the resiliency and the ability to problem solve, and the way that I'm watching, even around the world, because we work in over 200 countries, and I get to, earlier this morning, I was on with someone who's sitting in Singapore. I was on from someone who's sitting in Greece. You really get to see the resiliency of these different individuals and how they're creating new innovative solutions and solving problems. I have a lot of hope for the future because these generations that are younger than us, that are the workforce of the future, now it's no longer a stigma to actually work in a flexible environment. Before, it used to be for people who needed an accommodation, right? You used to have to get permission to work from home. I think there's going to be this understanding and forgiveness. And I think the resiliency of these generations who will say, okay, if I face a problem, big deal. I went through a pandemic, anything can be solved as long as we work together. So I have a lot of hope for that because I do believe that's the next generation.
That's so well put. But I don't know what chaos you're talking about. We've got virtual 8th grade, 7th grade, and kindergarten going on here. It's as smooth as velvet. I mean, it's
Of
a piece
course, of
cake.
course.
Yeah. Hey, that's a great opportunity to switch to some of the social issues. And the social issues have been with us for some time. Obviously, this summer took things to a new level with the murder of George Floyd and so many other issues. With one of the most recognized brands in the world, you have both a responsibility and an opportunity, I think, as you see it within the company. Let's talk about some of those social issues, how you leverage the brand, what you think your responsibility is.
Yes, well, the brand and the company in our case can't be separated because the largest brand we have is also the name of the company. And so I also want to look to the past to go forward because I want to share a good, a negative, and a good again. So you'll understand what I mean by that. When Martin Luther King was awarded the Nobel Prize, he was not going to be celebrated in Atlanta. The business community was not coming together. And there was supposed to be, the mayor was trying to hold a lunch to honor him, and the tickets were not selling. Robert Woodruff at the time, who's one of our founding fathers, he's known as Mr. or was known as Mr. Anonymous. He would always do good, but behind the scenes and very quietly. And so he quietly called the other business leaders and he said, let me be clear, because Atlanta had invested a lot in the city. We gave the property for Emory, the property for the CDC, for the airports. So we had done a lot in the community very quietly. But Mr. Woodruff used his voice to call and say, if you don't show up to this lunch and if you don't buy the tickets, and I guess Atlanta doesn't really need Coca-Cola here, does it? And really challenge the other business leaders in the community to step up. And guess what? Within 1 hour of the finishing of those calls, over 1,600 plus tickets were sold. It was sold out. And the celebration went on. And that was a really proud moment for our company, for our employees. Not a lot of people know. It's in our archives. We talk about it. Other people tell the stories. It is now sort of well documented. But that was one great story. But just because you have a success as a company, as a brand, doesn't mean you're perfect. So 20 years ago in year 2000, we also had one of the largest lawsuits brought to us by our Black employees. And it was around equity. And it was really one of those moments where we thought we'd been doing good because we'd done community donations, community work. We had equality in our workforce in terms of there were people in leadership roles, people in the pipeline, but there were some fundamental issues we were missing. And so that woke us up. We realized we had a lot more work to do and that we were not where we thought we should be. And so over the past 20 years, we started to do the work that was required to be done to fix those problems that our own employees had raised to us. And here we are today. And so this is an ongoing journey, is what I would tell you. Is I was personally really proud of our leadership and of the company because we've been learning from those issues. Today, we have over 19% of our employees are African American. We can do better, but we have really strong diversity because we try to mirror the marketplaces we serve, and we've done really well there and have significant improvements. At the same time, when George Floyd was murdered and we started to see what else was happening, that there was still a lot more work to be done in terms of ourselves as well as community and government, we said we can't stand by. And this is where I go back to a little bit of what we discussed earlier. We also saw our employees, we have a system called Yammer where employees can now communicate to the whole company at one time. So we started to see that employees really wanted to also participate in fighting getting the legislation around the Georgia hate crimes bill, and they wanted to have a role. And what James Quincy did, he's our chairman and CEO, came with some controversy, but I will tell you, he decided not to issue a press release around George Floyd. He decided to first listen to employees. It was all within a 4 or 5 day period, but a lot of people were wanting to know what was James Quincy going to say. Well, he decided to actually hold a global town hall, and he talked, and we got his permission. I recorded the town hall and I put his opening remarks onto the website so anyone can go to our website and see it. It's under our social justice area. And he wrote it himself. As you know, I have communications, but it doesn't mean I write what James Quincy says. He went away and he wrote it himself, and he said, I want to see what employees have to say. And when he was giving it, he actually had a real personal, emotional reaction because he realized that, people were really dealing with a lot and that these were serious issues. and that we needed to act and we couldn't wait, but he needed to also make sure that he listened to the right people in terms of the employees, stakeholders. But what he did is he listened, and it came with, when I say came with controversy, there were just as many people writing about why isn't James Quincy talking to the media and doing an interview, as you probably saw a lot of other companies were issuing statements. So he talked to the employees first, and that's when they said, we want to see our policies continue to improve to help society in this space. We want to use our brands to have a voice. We want to be able to support legislation. And so he created a framework, which is, and this is what he wrote about: listen, lead. So it's not good enough to just do, you have to lead in this space. Talked a lot about investment. So how do we make investment choices, and advocate? So, and how do you engage where employees can participate? So the employees did their own employee-led march. They got this together to march to the Georgia Capitol. We provided the parking spaces, the masks, but this was all employee-led. And that was about having them have a voice and hearing the good, the bad, and the ugly from our employees and respecting it and how they felt, but also the company taking a leadership role back to lead to be able to drive action. At the same time, we looked at our supplier investments and we said we actually need to increment and make a $500 million commitment to invest in Black-owned businesses, because fundamentally that's where the issue was. We'd already met a $1 billion commitment in terms of supplier diversity, but when you really started to look at the data, we weren't doing enough in terms of Black-owned business. So how could we do that? So he specifically put that out, and very quickly. And then on top of that, created an employee task force internally where he's meeting with them directly without anyone else, as an employee group made up of different levels, different nationalities, ethnicities, to really listen to what did the employees want. So I know I've gone on and on and on, but what I would say is that for any brand and for any company, the listening and the understanding and the transparency, understanding that this is a journey, and that because you have one success does not mean that you're done, but also not being afraid of your failure and being transparent about it, like we were when we had the lawsuit, and saying, how can we improve, versus just worrying about it. You actually have to act. And so it's one of those things where I'd say communication, transparency, being very clear, listening, and acting are so critically important. And we know we still have a lot more to do in this space. But it was something that I will tell you, I was really proud of our company, and frankly of James Quincy, who, wrote what he felt was important for the employees to hear, and then later on was willing to do the interviews, but not without having the employee discussion first.
And we talked about, with regard to sustainability, that what's different today is that it's not just the NGOs who are talking, it's investors who are talking, it's Larry Fink, as you said, it's Vanguard and others, and that's driving change. And it seems to me, and time will tell, that one of the differences regarding these social justice issues, and James is an example of it, is the introspection that's happening among leaders across the business community, and then the leadership that follows. But I think the press releases have been there for some time. I think the introspection and the leadership is a new level of dedication that hopefully also yields some different results.
I would agree, and I'd also say, especially organizations like yourself that can actually bring together competitors. Part of the difference is competitors working together to drive change in pre-competitive areas is actually going to have a long-term benefit to the brands, but it's organizations like yourselves that can actually get the brands working together. Even if we compete on the shelf or in advertising, there's some spaces where we absolutely have to work together.
Yeah. It makes good sense. Let me ask you one last question, and then I'm going to pivot to some questions that we've had submitted. In June, you, along with a number of major advertisers, announced that you were pulling back on your social advertising, and I think making a statement in doing so. Talk a little bit about that decision and the ramifications of it.
Yeah, so that one was not an easy decision, because we were first actually asked to join a boycott, and we said no. The boycott was against Facebook. And we said, we're not going to join the boycott. Actually, we need to look at our own policies, and we're going to pause all of our social media and all of our media. And so this was one of those moments where, and I can tell you, James and I were on the phone when this decision was made. It was made very quickly, in the sense of we knew that it was right to not just pause on one, because that wasn't going to solve the problem that existed. The problem was around transparency, eliminating hate speech, and really looking fundamentally about our own policies. Were we actually holding our partners accountable, or were our policies too loose, and did they allow for some of these things to happen where our brands would be featured? And so we decided to pause everything. It was, I will tell you, I was not the most popular person when we made some of these calls, but it was the right thing to do. And we put a team together to really look at our policies first. We rewrote our policies, we improved them. We found we needed to get tighter in terms of our expectation before we could hold our partners accountable. We started to hold meetings with those partners in the space, all the partners we have, from LinkedIn to YouTube to Snap to Facebook. We still have a lot of those ongoing conversations in terms of, here's our new policies and what we expect, and then share with us where you are and where you think, you can make improvements, or where you want to push back on some of our policies, but here's what we're thinking. And we shaped some of this in terms of really looking at our standard and where the companies were. And we said, we don't expect everyone to be perfect at first, but we do expect to see remediation plans and people really putting the investments and the protocols and the governance in place to get there. So we started to release some of our advertising back on. And so LinkedIn and a few others, we've already cleared in terms of advertising again. We haven't cleared them all yet. And so we still have an ongoing process where we think what Facebook has done has been great in terms of the commitments they announced publicly, and working with accounting firms to look at how do they do some independent audits, looking at some of their standards. And we're in open conversations, and we believe their intent and what they're doing is in the right space. And so you'll see us eventually come back on, as long as we see them delivering on those actions, and that the intent is there in the governance. But it's about, how do you partner with people through these times? Because these are big decisions, and it can impact not just those companies, but also your brands, because this is actually where consumers are. If you want to reach this next generation, it's going to be through these mediums. There's a lot. I have kids, you have kids, so you know exactly what they're on, and I'm sure you've seen a few TikTok videos yourself. So how do you actually ensure that you're leaving space? Because we know that we've not always been perfect, which is why we started with ourselves first in our own policies, and why we're saying we don't expect everyone to be perfect coming out of the box, but show us that the intent and that the progress is being made and that the actions are real. And so we feel that we're in a good place, and we feel that the partners have been great partners because they were actually very understanding. Not everyone liked it, but I will tell you that all of the partners that I spoke with were very understanding, and the ones that our teams have spoken with, they've put the things in place to start to move in the right direction in terms of the policies that we'd like to see set. And we've also worked with industry. So we didn't do this alone. This is another area where we also worked with industry.
Oh, but it's the power that you and your peers have as some of the biggest advertisers in the world. And I think we're all pleased to see you use that power. And that is what drives change. And it goes back to James' point about leadership. That is an example of that leadership. I want to get to two questions in the 5 minutes we have left. One is going to be more on the sustainability side. One is more on the social justice side. From a sustainability side, questions about your KPIs and how you decide. A company of the scale of Coca-Cola, how do you decide where to focus, and what are the KPIs that you put against that?
Yeah, so we had to get very focused because we used to have more than 50, let's just say that, before 2011. And what we did moving towards 2011 to today is we created a 10-point framework. We got very clear on the data that we were seeing from consumer research, industry research, as well as where we felt it was critical to the business. And so, just to give you an example, everything that we did is against our annual business plan as well. So it has to be core to business, as well as core to consumer and society, and where we can credibly make a difference. So there's criteria there. Just to give you an example, water. There is no beverage without water. You can't create one without it. Society needs water. How do you make sure that it's enhancing both? We set a goal to be 100% water neutral. We actually delivered that goal 5 years ahead of schedule. It doesn't mean we stop. We now look at where's the risk the highest to society, and how can we make a difference in terms of agriculture and extending this through the supply chain. Packaging, you have to deliver your beverage in some sort of vessel. So creating the goals around World Without Waste, and knowing that plastic pollution was a societal issue that we needed to be accountable to help solve in partnership with others. That's why we set those goals. around the world without waste. Carbon reduction, same goes on. If we get packaging right, almost 30% of the carbon we emit is within packaging. So we know that they're not mutually exclusive. At the same time, we have to set science-based targets to be credible in terms of how we're going to play our role in accountability in terms of that space. So we looked at all of the areas in terms of, can we credibly make a difference? Sugar reduction, as you saw, we've been working on sugar reduction for years because consumers were saying, I want to have different choices. I would love to have the same great taste as Coke, but without the sugar. So Coke Zero was invented, became $1 billion brand. How can we also reduce sugar in other brands? And so, for example, Sprite and Fanta in some countries don't actually offer up a sugar version. Or we introduced mini cans if you still wanted your same great taste, but less. So how do you do that? And so that also, by the way, critical to the business because that's what consumers were telling us they wanted. At the same time, we knew we needed to act because of the issues that were facing the world. So that's how we build it. We do it in partnership with the accounting firms to make sure standard definitions, they can be measured and tracked on an annual basis. We look at them quarterly as well, but annually is where we measure and track publicly, that they could be reported out on, and that we could credibly make that difference. And we also, the important part of this for people who are in brands is to also not be afraid to report out where you have a miss, but make sure that within your reporting, you also have a plan for how you're going to pivot or how you're going to get to be able to make that progress when you have a miss. So it should become a part of planning and set it according to your business and society and where your mutually shared opportunity exists.
Great answer. Last question for you, and it goes to an issue you and I were actually talking about offline, and that is Coke's active engagement in the sports community. Puts you very close to athletes who have obviously been a leading voice on social justice issues. We've seen athletes find and use their power over the past several months. How, if at all, is Coca-Cola supporting their efforts to drive social justice reforms?
Yeah, absolutely. Our values are very much in line, and we're thrilled. Many of the athletes we work with, like LeBron James, has been very vocal and active in this space. And so for us, we share those values. Otherwise, frankly, we wouldn't work with the athletes if we didn't share the values. And so for us, we're really excited. Sprite launched a program around supporting creators, and we ran some of the commercials recently from the BET Awards to other places. We're actually, instead of just promoting brand Sprite, we're actually helping to invest and support the voices of the creator community, whether that's inventors or athletes or entertainers. How do you actually support designers? But it's in the Black community and allowing them to have the advertising space and to share their stories. So for us, we're all in, and it's great to see the athletes and celebrities using their voice to drive social change.
Well, Bea, thank you so much. And I meant to say it before. You mentioned your husband works with the CDC. A big thank you to him as well. Obviously, we're all trying to get through a challenging situation. As you said, we're going to prove to be more resilient. We're going to come out of this a heck of a lot stronger. But a big thank you to both of you. Thank you for all your efforts, and thank you for joining us today. We're grateful. To those that have been watching, we welcome your feedback. Please send any comments you have to education@consumerbrandsassociation.org. Again, a big thank you to PwC. And then for those of you that are interested in future sessions, the next big one that I would mention will be joined by Sean Connolly, Chairman and CEO of ConAgra, on October 7th to talk about innovation in a COVID world. So please join us for that. And please go to please go to consumerbrandsassociation.org/CPG Speaks to see future sessions. Bea, thank you, and look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you, Jeff. Very much appreciated. Have a good one.
You too. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.